Ye Gods by Tom Holt. Chapter 9. Pluto reached out. Eventually, to his initial relief, his hand connected with something. It was wet. "Ugh," Pluto said, and reached for his handkerchief. After a further period of exploration, however, he arrived at the conclusion that beggars can't be choosers, and set out to follow the series of damp, smelly patches on the walls of nothingness to their eventual conclusion. If the dog came this way, he reasoned, Derry can't be far behind. He'd been feeling this way in this manner for perhaps 10 minutes when he felt something that wasn't wet and smelly. If anything, it was rather worse.
"Don't mind my asking," said Voice, "but why are you holding on to my ankle?"
Pluto considered the cold, scaly surface he just made contact with and shuddered.
"Beg pardon?"
he said.
"My ankle," said the Voice. "You appear to be holding on to it. Why?" "Because it's there," Pluto suggested. "Whoever you are, might I trouble you for some light, by any chance?"
"Light," the Voice said thoughtfully. "I may be able to manage that. Just bear with me for a moment, will you?" A moment later there was indeed light. "You've just missed him," said the Voice. Pluto blinked. The same could not be said for the piercing eyes of the colossal obsidian statue, which seemed to be trying to see through the back of Pluto's head.
"Have I?"
Pluto asked. "I imagine so," said the statue. "He went that way."
"Did he have a dog with him?"
Gelos made a show of thinking about this, and then replied, "I believe he did. Yes, and a man too." Pluto drew his brows together in a frown.
"Did he indeed?" he mused. "What sort of a—"
said Gelos. "There you have me. Let's see."
"Late, middle-aged," Pluto suggested. "Friendly-looking, big smile, probably in dressing gown and slippers."
"Now you come to mention it," Gelos said, "I think you could be right."
"Thanks," said Pluto. "How about the light? Do you think you could fix it to stay on for a bit? Only I get a bit jumpy in the dark. You know how it is."
The statue nodded his head. "I'll do my best," he said. Pluto turned to go and then looked back.
"We've met before, haven't we?"
"No," Gelos lied. "I don't think so."
"Ah, well," Pluto said. "I've got a rotten memory for faces. Occupational hazard, I suppose. Thanks anyway."
"My pleasure," said Gelos. "Go carefully now." Pluto waved and soon was lost to sight among the shadows. For his part, Gelos sighed and shook his head. Of his 3 nephews, he considered Pluto was probably, though only by a short head, the dimmest. He reflected for a moment on the fact that these same 3 nephews, idiots all, had castrated his brother Cronus, imprisoned his sister Rhea, and made him, Thing, the greatest of the 3, hide out at the end of a sleazy underground railway line for most of the history of creation. Fool's luck, he said to himself, or something like that. There is an old accountant's proverb that it's no good to the meek inheriting the earth if they end up having to pay tax on it of 40p in the pound. For his part, Thing, as Gelos should properly be called, didn't really mind being cheated out of his inheritance, just so long as none of the other members of his family got their grubby paws on it. Having reassumed his true shape, therefore, he reached out his mind into the world and made contact with his oldest and best ally, presently suspended from a number of mountain tops in the Caucasus.
"Pro, is that you, Gel? How are things your end?"
A flicker of a shadow passed across Prometheus's thought waves.
"I don't know," Prometheus replied. "I have a feeling something's going to happen." "You're right. Apollo is coming to get you." "I know that," Prometheus thought back. "The eagle told me. I've told it to lie low for a bit. Any suggestions?" "None that spring immediately to mind, Pro. I'd send you the boy, but I need him here. Mars is on his way, and Pluto's just come through. I need the dog too. Sorry." "That's fine. I'll think of something. Look, Pro, if things get out of hand, call me, will you? I might be able to help out. You never know." "What was that? It's a very bad line." "I said I might be able to help," Thing replied. Don't worry about me, Prometheus assured him. But send the boy when you can spare him. I'll store them till then, all right? That's the spirit.
Thing let the mental link subside and made himself a cup of Ovaltine, but his mind still moved on his comrade's dilemma. It was a pity he couldn't send the boy. Of course, he said to himself, I could always send the next best thing. At the very end of the corridor there was a door. Like most doors in the underground, it had a very silly notice above it. It said, "No exit." Extremely silly. After all, if you couldn't go out of it, what was the point in it being there? Jason shrugged and tried the handle. It was locked. "What do you think, Doug?" Jason asked. It was a rhetorical question, really, as he knew that the reply would be woof, but asking gave him time to weigh up the pros and cons of the move he had in mind. Woof. "That's settled then," Jason said happily. "What is the point after all?" He lifted his leg and gave the door an almighty kick. A door is just a door. It flew open, and a moment later Jason realised that the notice hadn't been so silly after all. Jason Derry. For someone who had led an adventurous life, frequently paddling in the backwaters of the paranormal and semi-divine, Jason hadn't quite managed to develop the proper attitude to apparitions. Contrast his reaction to Gelos in his statue persona, for example, with Pluto's recounted above. Pluto, you notice, just took a colossal talking statue in his stride. Pluto, after all, knows that something that looks like that can only be something else dressed up, since colossal talking statues are not, of course, possible. Was all Jason could find to say. Curiously enough, the apparition somehow managed to find it intimidating because it crouched further down behind its shield and trembled slightly. "Don't count on it, mortal," said the apparition. Jason took another look at the monstrous figure in front of him. Was it possible that this apparently divine and heavily armoured person was afraid of him? "Don't count on what?" he asked.
"Look," replied the apparition, "I'm only doing my job, okay? I didn't ask to be sent. I just got volunteered."
Time, Jason thought, to do a little essential spade work. "Who are you?" he asked.
"Mars."
"Pardon?"
"Mars."
Jason didn't relax, but the quality of his tension improved.
"Really?" he said. "It's not the sort of thing you'd lie about," replied the ex-god of war. "But if you don't believe me, I've got one of those little cards with my photograph on it. Hang on."
The Widowmaker leaned his spear against the doorframe, slipped off his shield and rummaged around in the inside pocket of his breastplate until he found a creased plastic folder. He opened it and Jason's eyes grew round. "Wow," he said.
"You what?"
"I mean," Jason said, "I've heard so much about you." Mars was so surprised he dropped his spear, which fell with a clang on the ground. At once Jason leaned forward and picked it up for him.
"Are you trying to say," Mars asked, "that you're actually pleased to meet me?"
"Of course," Jason said. "Hell, when I was at school, I had posters of you all round the walls of my bedroom. You were my favourite," Jason went on enthusiastically. "I read all about you in the mythology books. I even had a T-shirt printed with—" Mars dropped the spear again.
"You're sure you're not thinking of someone else?" he asked.
Jason shook his head, then blushed and produced a scrap of paper from his pocket. "I wonder," he said, "I know this must be really boring for you, but could you just write, I don't know, best wishes from Mars, something like that? It's not for me, it's for my—"
"You do know," Mars said, "why I'm here?"
"Well, no," Jason said. "Is there anything I can help you with?" he added hopefully. Mars swallowed hard.
"In a manner of speaking, yes."
"What?" Mars closed his eyes. Was this, he asked himself, yet another manifestation of his usual filthy look? The boy's eyes were shining at him with the golden light of hero worship. For the first time ever, he told himself, somebody is actually glad to see me. Ah, nuts.
"You see," Mars said as gently as he could, "I've been sent."
"Yes?"
"I've been sent by Jupiter."
"Yes? How is that, by the way?"
"To kill you," Mars grinned feebly, "as it were."
Physiognomists would have you believe that it is impossible for the human face to have no expression whatsoever. And if that is the case, then Jason was more divine than human. Mars bit his lip.
"When I say kill," he went on, "it's not as bad as it sounds. More translated to the stars. Immortality, apotheosis. Haven't you ever wanted to be a star?"
Jason said nothing. And, Mars continued hopelessly, the apotheosis framework is designed for maximum flexibility to cater for a wide range of individual aspirations. Red dwarf, blue giant, supernova, you name it, just so long as you're not, well, alive, really. Jason said nothing. They tell me, Mars whimpered, that it doesn't hurt a bit. It's not really death, you see, although, of course, death does come into it, peripherally, but it's really more sort of an... Ah! Jason woke suddenly from his reverie and kicked the dog savagely on the rump. Cerberus, he shouted, let go. Two of the dog's heads obeyed. The third needed a clip round the ears to convince it. Mars rubbed his ankle and then stood up. Thanks, he muttered wretchedly. Bad dog, said Jason. Mars, I'm so sorry. This bloody dog. Look, Mars said, don't worry about it, right? I mean, if someone should be apologising, it ought to be me. Except, he added without conviction, really, it's more of a career move than anything else. And you don't actually have any choice, of course. Sorry? So am I, Mars sighed. Believe me. But when the big J says that's the way it's got to be, then that's the way it's got to be. And Jason looked at him. No, he said. Sorry, said Mars, but I'm afraid... No, Jason said again. Just because Dad says something doesn't mean anything of the sort. I thought you would have realised that. For crying out loud, Mars thought. Listen, son, he said. I wish it didn't have to be like this. It doesn't. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. In the very back of his mind, Mars's memory nudged his consciousness and reminded him that in the old days, when he used to be the god of war, he didn't have to take this sort of shit from anybody, let alone a snot-nosed kid who thought the Widowmaker was a more suitable candidate for a role model than, say, Mother Teresa. Enough of this, it said. Now you listen to me, Mars said. I'm saying it does, and I'm the one who... About 10 seconds later, Jason helped Mars up again, handed him his spear, bent the chin guard of his helmet back into shape, dusted off his cloak for him, and apologised. Now get lost, he added. Mars, his divine head still swimming, tried one last protest. Look, he started to say, or I have to hit you again. Right, said Mars. Nice to have met you. Classy left hook you've got there, if you don't mind me saying so. Jason's face lit up. You really think so? Mars humped his throbbing jaw into a grin. You bet, he said. By a strange coincidence, that would have had the possibility of police round in 10 minutes flat with a forged warrant had they known about it. Mrs. Derry was at that very moment removing Jason's Mars posters from the walls of his bedroom. Part of being a mother is realising that one of these days the fledgling is going to leave the nest for good. The sensible mother realises that this is perfectly natural and also a heaven-sent opportunity to give parts of the nest their first thorough cleaning for 18 years. She was just wiping away a tear while trying to scrape off a chunk of petrified blue tack with the handle of a spoon when the doorbell rang. She muttered something, climbed down off the chair and went to see who it was.
Hello, Phyllis.
Mrs. Derry gave Jupiter that particular look that only female mortals can manage. It's a masterpiece of non-verbal communication and says, inter alia, that you are not welcome to come into my house because of what happened between us in the past, because you never even sent flowers or a postcard, and most of all because the kitchen floor hasn't been cleaned for a week. It is to Jupiter's credit that he managed to field it without falling over, but the gods, as Homer reminds us, are stronger by far than bread-eating mortals.
It's about Jason, Jupiter said. Can I come in?
Mrs. Derry hesitated even then. Because of Jupiter, her married life had been a cross between a Feydeau farce and one of Landseer's more exuberant productions. There was also the matter of the unwashed breakfast things, but in the end she nodded and Jupiter walked past her into the house. As he did so, small clumps of incredibly sweet-smelling flowers sprang up where his divine feet left their print in the soft pile of the carpet. This is a common manifestation of a divine presence, and Mrs. Derry could hardly fail to notice it. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said, wait there. She darted off and returned with a bundle of old newspapers, which she arranged by way of a footpath leading from the hallway to the lounge. Having placed the final page on the seat of the sofa, she sniffed, sat down in the armchair, and folded her arms disapprovingly. Well, she said.
Bleh,
said Pluto, in fact. He had been reduced to drying his hands on his handkerchief, an operation which always made him feel seedy. Having put the now damp hanky away, he looked in the mirror, adjusted his tie, and set out once again to find Jason Derry. This time he was successful, probably because Jason was now looking for him. "Hold it right there," said the son of Jupiter, "or you'll taste the edge of my sword. You got that?" Pluto turned around slowly and drew himself up to his full height. "I'll trouble you," he said, "not to take that tone with me. After all, I'm your uncle, so let's have a little respect, if you please." Jason's brows knotted. "Respect?" he queried. "Respect, and for pity's sake, put that sword down before you break something." Without quite knowing why, Jason did as he was told. Pluto nodded severely. "That's better," he said, "and take your hands out of your pockets." The explanation is, of course, simple for non-heroes to grasp. Having, throughout his career, been confronted with a succession of opponents who were bigger, stronger, faster, nastier, or better equipped with limbs than he was, Jason had never developed the necessary techniques for dealing with people who were smaller, weaker, or better mannered than himself. He had killed dragons, but he never had to jump a queue of pensioners in a post office. "You are Pluto?" he asked. "Certainly," said the god stiffly. "And I presume you're the Derry boy?" "Well, yes." Pluto gave him a look, and Jason suddenly became painfully aware that his fingernails weren't as clean as they might be. "In that case," Pluto continued, "I really must insist that you return my dog and stop making a nuisance of yourself." Jason shifted guiltily. "Have I been?" he mumbled. "Did you have?" said Pluto. "Wandering off, encouraging the dissidents, disturbing the guests, not to mention being extremely rude to a god you haven't even been introduced to. You ought to be thoroughly ashamed of yourself." Suddenly, and for the first time, Jason was, and it was a distinctly unpleasant feeling. Not only do heroes not know the meaning of fear, they are also generally immune to embarrassment. Otherwise, they simply couldn't do their job. You can't be expected to rush in where angels fear to tread if the opposition can make you feel 6 inches tall simply by reminding you to wipe your feet. "The dog, please," Pluto demanded. Cerberus looked up at Jason with 6 worried eyes, which Jason couldn't meet. Instead, he made a vague good dog go-to-master movement with his head and then looked away. The dog bit him. Jason's first reaction was to retaliate. Although somewhat unfashionable these days, retaliation is a tried and tested human reaction to threatening and inconvenient events, and deep down, Jason Derry was a traditionalist. He had therefore raised his foot to give the dog a kick that would have propelled it back topside when it occurred to him that the dog might be trying to tell him something. Not that there are more civilized means of data communication these days than a full set of teeth in the calf of the leg, but when the audience is likely to be unresponsive, subtlety is likely to be counterproductive. Jason lowered his butt, confused. "I said," said Pluto, "give me the dog." "No," said Jason. What he actually said was, "No, ... but the 3 dots were silent like the W in shipwright. "I beg your pardon?" "No," Jason repeated. "I don't think he wants to go with you." Pluto frowned magisterially. "That is hardly the point," he said. "Now, if you don't mind, my time is not without value." This remark had an effect on Jason. "Mine too," he said. "Push off." "How dare you speak?" Jason grinned. For the first time in his life, he was beginning to wonder whether there might not be just as much fun in beating up small, weak, defenceless people as in beating up mighty demons. Probably not, but you would never know if he didn't try. "I said, push off," he growled. The dog nodded his head, wagged his tail, and even managed to scratch one of its ears at the same time. Dogs have powers of balance that defy orthodox scientific explanation. Pluto, for his part, remembered that he was a god, and a high-rolling, time-served god at that, and he drew himself up to his false height and folded his arms grimly. "Impudent mortal," he began to say. Then he became aware of an agonizing pain in his left big toe and looked down. "Ow!" he said, and hopped up into the air. Jason pulled the saw clear of the deep incision he'd just made and laughed unkindly. A drop of ichor, God's blood, sparkled on the blade. "Now clear off out of it," he said, "or else you'll get this up your—" Pluto, now withdrawn into a relatively safe distance, scowled horribly and called on the legions of the damned to assist him. There are perks to being a god, and instant access to a large number of semi-divine heavies is one of them. "Arrest that mortal!" Pluto cried melodramatically. From the shadows behind him, about 10 or 12 muscular, well-armed figures stepped forward and advanced towards Jason, truncheons out. At the risk of spoiling the impact of what follows and interrupting the narrative curve, a word of explanation would seem called for. Although at one time service in the divine cohorts was regarded as supreme honour, ever since the evacuation of Olympus, the gods have found themselves with a serious recruiting problem on their hands. The sad fact is that the pay is so much better than private sector, and the prestige of being an instrument of divine justice comes a poor second to flexible working hours, a company chariot, and a free uniform, usually with a dragon logo on it. As a result, the gods have lately taken to recruiting from those inhabitants of Betamax 762-49708 who have inadvertently sailed off the edge of the world in the course of an ill-fated attempt to find a short sea route from Leningrad to Kiev. This has resulted in an overall lowering of staff quality. In fact, it is rumoured that the entire Divine Army could only extract itself from the proverbial paper bag with the aid of massed air support and covering fire from offshore naval batteries. There was a blur, and not long afterwards a contingent of celestial men-at-arms picked themselves painfully off the ground, gathered up their severed limbs, and limped away in search of something to stick them back on with. Jason lowered his sword. "Push off," he said. "You won't get away with this," Pluto muttered. "The mills of the gods grind slow, but they grind exceedingly small." "And cracked pitchers," said Jason, "have big ears. Hop it." Pluto is unusual among the gods in that he knows when he's beaten, but he had one last weapon in his armoury, and although he usually despised it as mere shallow mummery, there was nothing to be lost by using it. He shouted an arcane word, made a magic pass, and snapped his fingers. At once he vanished, and was replaced by an apparition that Jason didn't manage to forget for a long time. Pluto changed himself into a skeleton. No ordinary skeleton at that, but a grotesquely large, gaudily decorated, and extremely animated skeleton. The general effect was designed to convey an impression of extreme and irreversible death, coupled with an urgent desire to impose a similar condition on anything in the near vicinity, and it worked. There wasn't the smallest scrap of flesh anywhere to be seen, and the bones looked like malevolent ivory that has never really got over being separated from a perfectly good, comfortable elephant. As for the eyes, you could have defrosted pizzas with them. Jason, as has already been more than adequately recorded, didn't know the meaning of fear, but it's arguable that you don't need to know precisely what the word fish handler on a street sign means if directly under it you can see a shop with a slab full of dead cod in the window. He winced with his whole body and covered his eyes. Not so the dog. He took one look at the biggest collection of jumbo-sized, yummy-looking bones ever gathered in one place, uttered a threefold yelp of pure pleasure, and broke for lunch. In the newly restored quiet of his study, Gelos was communicating with Prometheus. As usual, it wasn't easy. The thought waves are horribly congested these days, and if you aren't careful, you can end up getting a stray fax right between the ears. But despite interruptions, they were in the middle of a highly serious discussion.
"And what about the boy?" thought Gelos.
"Don't worry about it," replied Prometheus. "It'll be the old story. Boy meets eagle, boy loses eagle, boy finally gets eagle."
"Supposing he isn't interested," Gelos objected.
"I mean, he may think there's more to life and being a hero than just pulling a bird."
"Well, leave that to me," thought Prometheus. "Back to business. Has he got rid of those two clowns for you?" Gelos laughed, something he tried not to do if he could help it. "Yes, indeed," he thought. "Young Jason has learned quite a lot today, I fancy, about life and disappointment, and coming to terms with the way things really are. And of course that when all is said and done, the only really effective way to deal with people is to hit them.
Oh, yes, he's coming along nicely for a youngster. Actually, thought Prometheus, I didn't want to worry you with this, but Eagle says that a certain person has been to see a certain person, and...
Gelos frowned. Telepathy is hard enough to understand as it is without archness as well.
What?
Jupiter, Prometheus spelt out in a mental whisper,
has gone to see Phyll. All right, I think I see what you're getting at. Problems?
Possibly, Prometheus replied.
You see, we've been concentrating so much on the fact that you know who is the boy's father that we may have neglected the other side of the equation. You think so? Queried Gelos. I'm sure she's a very nice lady, but... All I'm saying is, thought Prometheus, oh hell, someone's coming. I'd better think you back later. Ciao.
A long shadow fell across Prometheus's face, and a voice spoke somewhere above him.
Traitor, said the voice.
Prometheus twisted his neck round until he could see a pair of golden sandals with a P.A. monogram on them, which he knew stood for Phoebus Apollo. They were the relic of an ill-fated sponsorship deal between a major multinational sportswear company and the most photogenic of the male Olympians. Ill-fated because Jupiter doesn't hold with his family appearing in full-page colour on the backs of Sunday supplements, and took his wrath out on the company in question by turning them all into lizards.
Hello, Paul, Prometheus replied. I'd offer you a drink or something, but I'm a bit tied up at the moment. Could you call back later?
Traitor! Apollo repeated, not from any great depth of feeling in the matter, but because he was embarrassed and couldn't think of anything else to say. Strictly unofficially, and then only outside the range of Jupiter's mental radar net, he had always considered the treatment meted out to Prometheus to be not only unjust, but injudicious. The Titan, unlike the rest of the gods, was clever, wise even, and it was surely only a matter of time before he pulled a stroke that would deal the divine prestige of the Olympians such a blow that thereafter they would be hard put to it getting work during conjuring chicks for children's parties.
You think so? Inquired Prometheus, mildly.
Yes.
Oh, the Titan shrugged. I'm sorry about that, Paul. One does what one thinks is right, you know.
I don't.
Sorry, said Prometheus. I forgot. You're a god. You don't have to worry about that sort of thing.
Are you implying?
Prometheus chuckled. I never imply, he said. Not any more. I occasionally implied a bit when I was younger, but at my age it takes me all my time to insinuate, let alone imply. Usually I just say things.
Are you saying?
I'm saying, said Prometheus, that since you're a god and effectively beyond any form of retribution, you can do what you damn well like. Absolute power. Is that correct?
Apollo tried to look stern. Correct, he said, and his eyes sparkled with pale blue fire. Absolute power.
Then how come, said Prometheus quietly, you can't afford a new chariot?
This took Apollo by surprise, as if he had sliced into a hard-boiled egg to find a baby chicken sitting in there looking at him. What? He said.
You heard me, Prometheus replied. I could hear the wheel bearing squeaking from here. Also, from the sound of it, your suspension is completely short. Your axle is about as straight as a bent corkscrew. There's enough body putty in your wings to fill in the Cheddar Gorge, and if your offside front shaft makes it through another 5,000 miles, you have my permission to use my head as a basketball. So?
Well, said Apollo weakly, you can't get the parts these days.
So why not get a new one? Prometheus answered. They tell me Vulcan is a very nice little two-seater, 4-winged horsepower, ABS brakes, adjustable sides and wheels as standard, 4,000 gold starters plus interest-free credit.
Apollo frowned. Where am I likely to get that sort of money? He said. With no worshippers and no sacrifices. Prometheus made a mighty effort and nodded his head.
Exactly, he said, and whenever you try any little sideline, just for a bit of pin money, the old fool puts a stop to it. You'll notice, by the way, that he never drives the same chariot 2 years running. And how many temples has he still got? Or Minerva? The last recorded sacrifice to Minerva took place in AD 512, but isn't she driving around in a Gamma Reg Vulcan popular with knackered brake linings? Look! Or Venus, Prometheus went on pitilessly. What's it she's got now? Vulcan XR7 GTS with front dove drive, isn't it? Or Neptune with that big new Valhalla Donnerschlag, Vollsprung, Duck, Zauber and all that. Trust Nep to be the one with a flash foreign chariot. Or Mercury, zippy little Vulcan Elite Turbo with a sticker saying, "My other chariots are Vulcan 696 on the rear sun guard." Or Diana. "All right," said Apollo, "you've made your point." "Maybe," said Prometheus, "and obviously you really don't care about such demeaning things as status. Now I'm impressed, honestly. If I was in your position and had to suffer the indignity of being burnt off at traffic lights by part-time river gods in souped-up Vulcan firebirds." "All right," said Apollo. "Look, with furry dyes hanging from their rear mirrors. Look!" "Yes?" Apollo had forgotten what he was going to say. He scowled ferociously and scratched the back of his neck. "All I was trying to suggest," Prometheus went on, "is that you must be in it for the job satisfaction, not the material rewards. I'm right, aren't I?" "Well, I can understand that," said Prometheus. "You're a god's god, Paul, if you don't mind my saying so. Or you were, at any rate, before Jupiter decided to pack it all in and retire. Nice, is it, up there in the sun? Very playing the game all day, so I hear. That must be very, The Titan paused, as if mulling over his choice of word. "Fulfilling, mustn't it?" "Well, admittedly," said Prometheus, "there's not as much averting plagues and redressing wrongs as there used to be. But at least you can lie in of a morning. Now, you couldn't do that when you were driving the chariot of the sun, could you?" That must have been fun, I bet," Prometheus said with a chuckle. "Out of interest, what could the old bus do on the flat with wind behind it?" "Oh, 1,000,005, 1,000,010, Apollo said dreamily. 0 to 250,000 in 4.72. I once got out of her." He stopped and made an impatient noise. "Look," he said angrily. "Whereas now," Prometheus murmured, "there isn't really any reason to get out of bed at all, is there? You could sleep in all day and nobody would either know or care. Still, if that's what you want out of everlasting life—" "Prometheus!" "But I was forgetting," said the Titan. "You may not get to drive the sun or answer the prayers of cities, but you do get to run little errands for the Big J and Minerva, of course. I expect she keeps you pretty busy, doesn't she?" "It's odd that," Prometheus mused, "the way she bosses you about when, strictly speaking, but that's none of my business. Forgive me, please, I don't get many people to talk to these days, except the eagle. You've met the eagle, haven't you? Nice girl. It's a she, you know. In fact, more she than the eagle." Apollo couldn't help asking what Prometheus meant by that exactly. "Didn't you know?" replied the Titan. "I thought they'd have told you. How strange. No, eagle isn't really an eagle at all." "Isn't it?" "She," Prometheus corrected him, "she's actually a wood nymph. Name of Charionessa. Nice name, don't you think? Jupiter turned her into an eagle as a punishment." "What for?" "Unfriendliness," Prometheus replied. "Jupiter likes his wood nymphs friendly, you see. Unlike Juno, she likes Jupiter's wood nymphs decidedly hostile. In fact," Prometheus went on blandly, "that's why there are so few of them about these days. What with Jupiter turning them into things if they don't, and Juno turning them into things if they do. Still, it's not for me to pass comments on the morals of my betters. Now, what's the little errand they've sent you on this time?"
Apollo struggled for some words and found a phrase that Minerva had supplied him with. "I've been sent," he said, "to punish a traitor." "Really?" "Yes." "Anyone I know?" "Yes." "Are you going to tell me?" said Prometheus, "or is it a secret?" Apollo ground his teeth wretchedly. "I think you can guess," he said. "Not me," Prometheus replied. "Always was hopeless at guessing. Do you remember all those games of 20 questions we used to play when you were a boy?" Apollo remembered very well. He had had the misfortune to be a plump, querulous child, with a tendency to burst into tears when rebuked, and the Titan was the only grown-up who could ever be bothered with him. "No," he said. "Don't you? Ah, well," said Prometheus, "never mind. Like they say, just because you're omniscient doesn't mean you don't forget the occasional birthday." Apollo suddenly recollected that today was Prometheus's birthday, his 5,000,005th. Now, gods are very sensitive about such things, and the phenomenon that mortals know as the Milky Way is in fact the reflection of the space-time continuum of the 7,000,000 candles on Jupiter's birthday cake. It was therefore not unnatural that Apollo's somewhat soft heart should have been affected by this, particularly when he noticed, out of the corner of his all-seeing eye, a milk bottle with a single dandelion in it standing on an adjacent rock, and next to it a piece of playing card with "Happy Birthday Prometheus from Eco" scrawled on it in crayon. In fact, a tiny tear lurched out the corner of one sky-blue eye until the heat of his gaze evaporated into a tiny saline deposit. "Oh, all right," said Apollo with a badly muffled sob. "If you must know, I've been sent to punish you." "Oh, yes," said Prometheus mildly. "Why is that?" "For subverting heroes," Apollo snuffled. "Subverting heroes," Prometheus repeated. "I see. And what are you going to do to me?" "Well, first," Apollo sobbed, "I'm supposed to flay you alive with a lash made of vipers, and then I've got to hang you by your ankles from the firmament, and have vultures gnaw at you. Oh, Uncle Bro, I'm so unhappy." Apollo sank to his knees and subsided into a small, whimpering heap. Just like when he was a boy, Prometheus reflected, and Minerva and Diana used to take his golden bow away from him and put comets down his back. For a moment he felt ashamed of taking advantage of the boy's kind heart. It was hard to think of little Poll as anything but a boy. And then he thought of the vultures and hardened his mind. It's a nasty world, he told himself. God eat God is the rule, and the one thing a superhuman being can't afford to have is humanity. "It's all right," said the Titan softly. "Now then, what's the matter with you?" Jupiter paused for a moment, searching for the right word, and looked out of the window. "It's not as if," he said, "he's done anything wrong." "But you just said—" "Well," Jupiter replied, "that's not quite true. He's been very naughty, conspiring with prohibited persons, duffing up gods. Can't be allowed to do that sort of thing. But nothing serious, nothing we can't deal with." Jupiter's words tailed off, and he squinted at something sticking up out of the ground between the rose bushes and the arum lily. "Excuse my asking," he inquired, "but is that the skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus I can see out there?" "Where?" "There." Mrs. Derry looked closely. "Oh, that," she said, "yes." "Where did you get that from?" "I don't know," said Mrs. Derry. "I don't want to know either. Hopefully he's given up doing that." "Has he?" "Well," replied the hero's mother, "last month there were a couple of Rottweilers and a big sort of lizard thing, but apart from that there hasn't been anything since the mammoth. Just as well, if you ask me. It's a small garden, and it was getting so bad we were having to double bank them in places, and it only takes a shower of rain or something like that." "Yes," said Jupiter, shuddering. "Yes, quite. Well, as I was saying, I really don't want to have to come the heavy father with the lad. It's really not my style at all. So if you could see your way to having a word with him—" "I'll try," said Mrs. Derry doubtfully, "but you know what they're like at that age." "Not Jason," said Jupiter, "and I always knew that if you told him not to do it, then he'd stop. You know he always listens to you." "Well," Jupiter managed to restrain his grin of triumph. "Just tell him," he said, "that you've heard he's been getting into trouble, and how worried you've been, and ask him to stop it.
That'll do the trick, I promise you. He looks up to you, you know."
"Well," said Mrs. Derry again, "if you think it's for the best—"
"Stands to reason, doesn't it?" Jupiter said. "Not that I'll ever willingly let him come to any harm, you understand, but even I can't be in more than 4 places at once, and these people he's been seeing, Prometheus and Gelos and that crowd, really they're no good. I mean that. Sooner or later they'll get him into real trouble, and it may well be I won't be able to do anything for him. It's for his own good," Jupiter added, recalling the phrase from the back of his mind. "You'll see."
"All right, then," Mrs. Derry said. "I'll see what I can do." Jupiter smiled.
"That's splendid, then," he said. "Right. Well, it's been great seeing you again, Phil, but it's time I wasn't here. Give my regards to, your husband."
"Douglas."
"Quite so, yes, Douglas. How are things in the, what is it he does?"
"He repairs television sets."
"Does he really? How very clever of him. Not that I watch much television myself, actually, but, well, do give him my regards anyway."
"I will." Jupiter's smile became slightly more glassy, if anything.
"And you take care of yourself too, of course. How's the back?"
"Painful."
"Still? I am sorry. I must remember to get a specialist to fix you something for it."
Mrs. Derry's eyes said, "You promised me that the last time," but she said nothing. She had a thin, crimped look on her face, and Jupiter felt very strongly that he wanted to go now. He went. Halfway down the street, on his way to his rendezvous with his driver, he met a policeman on his beat. Being omniscient, he knew the officer's name was Sergeant Smith, and that he had acquired a wholly unjustified reputation for seeing things. Being possessed of a rather antisocial sense of humour, he transformed himself into a 12-foot-high djinn with 10 arms and 3 heads, stepped deliberately into the policeman's path, raised his 3 hats, nodded affably, and vanished in a cloud of opalescent light. Jason stepped back, whipped the sword of Glycerion from its scabbard, shouted his battle cry, and sprang forward. The hoplites of hell grinned at him, clashed their swords on their shields, and advanced to meet him. There was a crunch like a huge crab being run over by a lorry, and a number of thin screams. "Next!" Jason demanded. The Hell Captain looked at his 12 decapitated warriors, shrugged disinterestedly, and fell in the pouch that hung from his belt. It contained dragon's teeth, which, when scattered on the ground, turned into hideous and well-armed warriors. Warriors with no mercy, warriors who knew no fear, warriors who were insensible to pain, warriors who didn't need to be paid. The Hell Captain broadcast a handful of teeth, stepped back, and folded his arms. Perhaps he was getting a little bit tired, and this time there had been 15 of them rather than 12. It took Jason all of 20 seconds to reduce this contingent of draconian byproducts to rubble. On the other hand, one of them had contrived, in its death throes, to tread on Jason's foot, thereby kindling his fury. For the first time, the Hell Captain felt a trifle uneasy. He felt in the bag and found there were only another 50 or so teeth left. Being prudent rather than chivalrous, he sewed the lot. "That's more like it," Jason yelled. "If there's one thing I can't stand, it's all this hanging about." He flourished a sword like a tennis player practicing throwing backhand smashes. A spectral warrior, taller by a skull than its fellow demons, grounded its shield and scimitar with a clang. "Right," it said. "That does it." Jason and the Hell Captain both stared at it. It folded its arms defiantly. "It's all right for you," it said. "You just look at it from our point of view for a second, will you?" "Can we please get on now?" Jason interrupted. "I haven't got all day, you know." "Stuff you," said the spectral warrior. "And don't you start either," it went on, turning and giving the Hell Captain a filthy look through the eye slits of its coal-black helm. "We've had it up to here with the both of you, haven't we, lads?" The other spectral warriors nodded their inky plumes in agreement. There was a small autumn of falling shields. "I mean," the spectral warrior spokesthing went on, "just think about it, will you? We start off live in the mouth of a bloody great dragon, right? Now that's not exactly fun and games, what with the bad breath and fireworks display slushing round you every time the sodding thing sneezes. You wouldn't think it could get worse, would you?
Only it does, because some nerd whips us out of it with a pair of rusty pliers, dunks us in a vat of magic potion, and the next thing we know, we're a phalanx of doomed psychopaths getting smashed to buggery by some 8-foot jerk with a sword. Somebody tell me, for crying out loud, what is the point?
The other spectral warriors clapped their fleshless hands and cheered. Jason frowned ominously. The Hell Captain tried hiding behind his shield. This sort of thing wasn't supposed to happen, was it? "All right," he said. "So what am I supposed to do about it? Explain it all the way to management while you lot all puddle off and become hairdressers?" His words were drowned out by the clamour of furious serpentine dentistry. He closed his eyes and banged on the ground with his shield for quiet. Eventually he got it. "Look," he said, "believe me, I am not unsympathetic. I know how you feel. It can't be easy, I know. But you've got to accept that in this life—" The spokes thing made a rude noise.
"But we're not in this life, are we?" it pointed out. "We aren't even human. That's the bloody galling part of it. We're just a job lot of recycled bridge work, and we aren't going to stand for it. You want this job done, you get some of your precious fellow humans to do it. Right?"
The Hell Captain went on as red as tomato.
"Who are you calling human?" he demanded.
"Oh, yeah," replied the spokes thing. "Want to make something of it, do you?"
There was another crunch, like a huge crab being run over by a lorry, and a number of thin screams. Jason leaned on the hilt of the sword, scratching his head and wondering, as he did from time to time, exactly why he bothered. There was a quiet cough at his elbow. He swivelled around, sword uplifted, to find a small fiend with a pitchfork in one hand and a cellular telephone in the other, looking up at him.
"Jason Derry?" it asked.
"Yeah?"
"Call for you," said the fiend,
and offered him the telephone. Jason took it, nodded, and thanked him. The fiend didn't move, except to extend its hand meaningfully. Jason sighed, felt in his pocket, and produced a 50 pence and 2 tens, the sum of his monetary wealth at that moment. Heroes rarely carry money around with them, as it spoils the line of their clothes. The fiend gave a contemptuous look and withdrew. "Hello," Jason said into the phone.
"Jason," said a female voice, "is that you?"
"Hi, Mum," Jason replied. "How did you get my number?" he asked suspiciously. There was a brief pause.
I got it from your dad," said Mrs. Derry.
"Dad?" Jason asked. "Which one?"
"Big Dad."
"Oh," Jason said. "Might have known. What did he want?"
"Jason," said his mother, "I want you to come home right now. Do you hear me? I'm very worried about you."
"But, Mum," he ducked to avoid a severed arm. "I can't come now. I'm busy."
"Don't give me that, Jason," said Mrs. Derry severely. "You're to come home right now, or I'll be seriously angry. Do you hear?"
"But, Mum—"
"And no buts," said Mrs. Derry. "I'll expect you back for tea." The line went dead, and Jason handed the phone to the dwarf. While he had been otherwise occupied, the Hell Captain had reduced his 50 remaining meridians to a mound of battered and dismembered calcium, and his martial ardour was beginning to ebb slightly. That, he realised, only left him. "Now then," Jason said, hefting the sword and wafting the graceful square cut through the clammy air, "let's make this as quick as possible, because I really do have to go soon."
"Suits me," said the Hell Captain. "In fact, why not let's just leave it at that, shall we, and call it a draw or something?"
"A draw?
Why not?" replied the Hell Captain. "I'll make it 50 spectral warriors each, a tie."
Jason shook his head and advanced crabwise, whirling the sword above his head like an enchanted rotor blade.
"Actually," remarked the Hell Captain, backing away, "on reflection, I find that you win on higher scoring rate. Congratulations! You paid a fair match, hard but fair, and the best man won."
"We'll win," Jason corrected him,
"as soon as you stop moving about." "Did I happen to mention," said the Hell Captain, "that I've done my shoulder? You can't expect me to fight you with a dicky shoulder, now can you?"
"Shut up and fight."
"Shan't."
The Hell Captain sheathed his sword, dropped his shield, and jumped on it.
"I yield," he said. "Got you there, haven't I?" Jason considered this for a moment, then he sheathed the sword and hit him.
"Nobody loves a smart ass," he replied, and then marched off up the tunnel towards a distant crack of daylight. About 5 minutes later, the Hell Captain stopped shamming dead, picked himself up, and looked cautiously round. As far as he could tell, there was nothing there except the butchered components of 100 spectral warriors. But he wasn't taking any chances.
"I," he said, "am dead.
I was killed in the fight. This is just my astral body talking. Since I am dead, I am excused further duty. If you want any other heroes catching, you can bloody well catch them yourself." He stripped off his dented helm, tossed it aside, and limped off towards the topside. Piccadilly and a new life. For the record, he later became a successful and highly respected chiropodist. Further details have been suppressed at his own request.